Welcome to Church and State with Brian McCall and Chris Ferrara, where every 2 weeks we talk about an event that's occurring or a theme occurring in the church and state. And ironically, as we've said over the past couple of years, the church and state have never been in greater sync. They seem to be working for the same goals. Sadly, they're not the goals of the church.
Self-destruction.
Self-destruction. So
I just looked out my window. I saw a flash. I thought it might have been the hydrogen bomb from Russia, since they're determined to start World War III. But we'll get to that, I guess.
We'll get to that. Let's start with the ecumenical World War III. Pope Francis has been busy. He went over to Asia for a couple of weeks, and he went to these various meetings and interfaith meetings. And he said in both of them that all religions are a path to God. All religions are like different languages that say the same thing, but just using their own language. And it was funny. I watched the video of one of these. He was saying one of them is this group of like Hindus and Muslims and Buddhists. All religions are paths to God. And they're sort of looking at him like, what? What are you saying? No, they're not. But he then goes and gives another speech, repeats it, doubles down on it after he's criticized. Then he comes back to Europe. He goes to Paris to an ecumenical, as John Venari used to say, hootenanny. And he gives a little speech there and he says, "Thank you. This event was inspired by the Assisi meetings of John Paul II. And my message to you is use the divine inspiration that is present in all religions. That will guide you. Just use whatever God inspired in your religion."
That's heresy.
So, I mean, is there any way there are people trying to say, well, this doesn't really mean heresy? I mean, do you think there's any way around this, or is this just a clear denial of the faith?
Well, if you're saying that divine inspiration animates the teachings of all religions, then you're saying God contradicts himself in terms of his revealed truth. He's revealing contradictory truths. It's an absolute heresy. Now, does that mean we say that the Holy See is vacant, yada, yada, yada? No, we don't say that, because a pope who commits heresy has to be convicted of it. But there's no tribunal that can convict the Pope of heresy. He has to be shown to be obstinate. He has to be shown to understand that he is heretical and that he is knowingly denying an article of divine and Catholic faith. And in what form would you be able to do that? You can't. So we're stuck with a situation in which an apparently heretical Pope has to be treated as if he retains the office, because there's no alternative. What does that mean practically speaking? There's no practical difference between the sedevacantist position and our position. We just ignore him.
Yeah.
And we refuse to follow him, as if he were sedevacantist.
Right.
But this, in terms of these gatherings of all the different religions, this is the nightmare of the preconciliar popes fulfilled. Yeah. And the classic example of that is the encyclical Mortalium Animos, which Pius XI issued in 1928, almost exactly 100 years ago, to attack the Protestant ecumenical movement, which was of Protestant origin, and to warn that it concealed a very dangerous error. This is worth quoting at length. Here's what he said. "Conventions, meetings, and addresses are frequently arranged by these persons, at which a large number of listeners are present, and at which all, without distinction, are invited to join in the discussion, both infidels of every kind and Christians, even those who have unhappily fallen away from Christ, or who, with obstinacy and pertinacity, deny his divine nature and mission." Then he goes on to say, "Such attempts cannot be approved by Catholics because they are founded on the false opinion," he says, "which considers, wait for it, all religions to be more or less good and praiseworthy, since they all, in different ways, manifest and signify the sense which is inborn in us all, and by which we are led to God, and the obedient acknowledgement of his rule," which is exactly what Francis is saying, condemned here as an error. And what results from this error? He says that people who abide by this error little by little turn aside to naturalism and atheism, from which it clearly follows that one who supports those who hold these theories and attempt to realize them, as Francis is doing, is altogether abandoning the divinely revealed religion. There's only one.
But you're just pitting one pope against the other.
The problem is, if we're in a situation in which you actually can pit one pope against another, it has to be the case that the pope against whom we are doing the pitting must have departed from the constant teaching of the church, because we haven't seen this before in church history, where it would be possible to take the statements of one pope and put them into contradistinction with the statements of the currently reigning pope. That's never happened before. It's only been happening with some regularity at different levels of teaching since the Second Vatican Council. So yes, we are pitting one pope against another. We're pitting against the current popes, the conciliar pope, constant teaching of every pope before them.
Right. Well, what about, here's what some of the pope-splainers have been doing, trying to, and I believe it or not, there's still a few of them out there. They said, well, I mean, what he's saying is true because, you know, we can, through natural reason, come to believe that there is a God and that he created everything. And that's sort of what all religions teach. All religions teach there's a God and he's a creator. So, I mean, on that level, what he's saying is not really wrong, right?
Well, it's exactly wrong, because the error condemned, and I quote it again, is that all religions are more or less good and praiseworthy. There's no way you can get around the conclusion that what Francis has said is precisely that. Not only that they're all good and praiseworthy, they're all paths to God, which is good and praiseworthy plus.
Right.
Not only are they good and praiseworthy, which could be something on a natural level, no, they lead to salvation. They're all paths to God. What else could he mean by a path to God? Does this path to God, even if you're assuming this is some natural truth, does it lead to the Catholic Church? Not according to him. If he were to say they're paths to God in the sense that people who follow these religions are drawn by the truth toward the ultimate source of the truth, which is Christ and the church he founded, that would be one thing. You could actually make that argument, that every truth that people discover, such as the truths discovered by the Greeks before divine revelation, lead one to the conclusion that there is, in fact, one God. This is why Socrates had to take the hemlock, because he mocked the notion of multiple gods. It was obvious that at some point you had to arrive at a being of complete simplicity, the one true God. That's why the church speaks of the Greeks as having had the seeds of the word of Christ. So in that sense, it's true. You can find seeds of the word in other religions, but they're not paths to God.
They're paths. I mean, you could, like you say, there's seeds. There's seeds leading you to the path to God. It's a big difference,
right?
But
no, he has different paths, many paths to God. There's only one path. I am the way, the truth, and the life. That's it. There's only one path.
And again, what he's saying, his example is languages. So you have this concept, right, of an orange. We call it an orange, but in Spanish they call it a laranja. It's all the same thing, just a different word. So essentially, his example is saying, Allah, Buddha, the 5,000 Hindu gods, they're all just different names for the same being. Jesus Christ, Zoroaster, whatever. They're all just different translations. I mean, that's essentially what he's doing, which just, why be Catholic? If it's just, it's like, why you speak Spanish or you speak French or Portuguese, it doesn't really matter. You're still communicating.
They're not different words for the same thing. They're different words for different things. So the words that other religions use to describe God are connote something that is other than what we understand God to be. So these terms are not synonymous. They're heteronymous. They mean different things. The God of those who worship the great thumb is not the God of the revealed truth of Christianity. As I said moments ago, Christ said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. That's it. There's only one way. Now, Francis did not say that all these different religions lead to the one way. He might have, in some sort of twisted way, argued along the lines of Ronner's Anonymous Christian that somehow these people will be conjoined to the church because they're following the truth according to their conscience, and before death they will be led to understand that Christ is the one true God, the Son of God, second person of the Holy Trinity. That's not what he says. He says those religions, those other religions in themselves, with their different content and their truths which contradict, their so-called truths, which contradict the revealed truth of Christ, are all paths to God. Paths, plural. There can't be many paths to God. That's a heresy. It's that simple. Whether he understands it as such is not for us to judge. You could say, objectively speaking, that's a heretical proposition. It's condemned by Pius XI.
Yep.
And what's only anonymous is an error.
Well, I've already mocked the Pope splainers, but I also want to point out...
How many of them are left, by the way?
I mean, there's a handful still. But more interestingly, there's a bunch of people who have sort of... Francis has been too much for them. So they would have defended anything the last several popes have done, but like, this is a line too far. But as to them, I would say, to be honest, there's not a lot different, frankly, between what he's saying and what I think Ratzinger, Benedict XVI, John Paul II believed, acted upon, and even said, with one little distinction that I think is not great. So essentially, I think what John Paul II and Benedict XVI thought, and this comes from the documents of Vatican II themselves, well, there's sort of ways to be saved in all these other religions. You can kind of make it there, but the fullness of... There's one path. The full path is in Christianity and Catholicism, but there's kind of like other ways to get there that are not as great, but you'll make it anyway. So if you want to go like first class ticket to heaven, be Catholic. If you want to take a slow boat where you got to go across the ocean in steerage, okay, it's really not that pleasant. You'd be better in the church, but you'll kind of get there. I mean, that is very much what their whole talk about the Catholic Church contains: the fullness of salvation, where elements of it are everywhere else. Pope Francis, I think, says, that's kind of hypocritical. We're saying we're better than them. He just sort of dispensed with that last bit and just says, just forget it. They're all paths. And we're not even going to claim any fuller nature or greater superiority for the church. We're just one among many.
Well, I think I ought to make a distinction within that distinction. They may say, meaning Ratzinger, John Paul II, that there are elements of truth in other religions, but the fullness of truth is to be found in the Catholic Church. I don't think they ever said the fullness of salvation is found in the church, such that you can have a second-class salvation as a Hindu. And I think it's worth noting that Ratzinger, I believe it was 1991, at the University of Dallas, gave an address to the American bishops in which he said this idea that anyone who follows his conscience is saved by reason of that alone has resulted in the demissionization of the church. Why be a Catholic? The faith would be a burden, he said. Not the way to salvation, but a burden. Don't tell anybody about the faith. That person is perfectly fine the way he is. Well, he attacked that very notion. So it's more complicated with Ratzinger, who became Benedict XVI, and probably a little bit more complicated with John Paul II, despite his Assisi events. But again, you have to admit that when you conduct an event like the Assisi event, in which everyone in the world of whatever religion is praying to peace, what is the message you're sending? That all religions are more or less good and praiseworthy.
Well, when you put a Buddha on top of the tabernacle for them to pray to Buddha,
that was done in one of the local parish churches.
Yes.
People think that he did that, but it was actually in one of the parish churches in Rome. But the message he was sending was, I covered that event at the time. I was writing for the Remnant. It was back in 2000. Yeah. And I was sitting in the press room, and they were lighting the silly oil lamps. Everybody was coming up. And one of the reporters behind me said, and this is perfectly appropriate, that he began to sing, "All we are saying is give peace a chance." He was mocking the whole event. It was a folk song. Right. So it was silly. And right after that, of course, the world exploded in different kinds of violence, as I pointed out in columns I wrote afterwards. So this idea that all religions can pray to God and that all prayers are valid and all religions are more or less good and praiseworthy, that means the end of revealed religion. What's the point of a revealed religion? If the religions that aren't revealed and preach errors, some of them damnable errors, are paths to God. So, again, we're dealing with an apparent heresy. There's no way around it.
No. We just need to pray for this papacy to end, however, and move on. Well, with that, let's turn over to the state. And before we talk about a couple things that have been going on, this Thursday, the commemoration mass for 2 female martyrs has this gospel in it. And it's the Gospel of Luke 21:9-19. At that time, Jesus said to his disciples, "When you hear of wars and insurrections, do not be terrified. These things must first come to pass, but the end will not be at once." He said to them, "Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes in various places, and pestilences and famine, terrors and great signs from heaven. But before all these, they will arrest you and persecute you." So this week we learned that the warmongers, the globalists, want even more. Netanyahu of Israel has basically announced that he's preparing for a ground invasion of Lebanon, called on the U.S. for more help. The people behind the senile old man that's supposedly still president mustered U.S. troops, sent them to the island of Cyprus right off of Lebanon. Meanwhile, Zelensky's flown over to stump for Kamala Harris. Parentheses, that's not foreign interference in an election, by the way.
Oh, no, not at all.
But while he was campaigning for Harris, he called for the United States and NATO to give him long-range missiles to shoot at Moscow, to which Putin, not a great guy, but not a reasonable, kind of an expected reaction, said if the West even indirectly cooperates with attacks on Mother Russia's homeland, that will escalate this to a nuclear situation, and the use of nuclear weapons in retaliation is not ruled out. Where are these leaders sending us?
They're obviously lunatics, and they're following the same foreign policy that has ruined every place where it was implemented, from Iraq to Afghanistan to the Middle East as a whole, and now to Ukraine. They want war with Russia over the Donbass, the eastern part of Ukraine, whose borders, by the way, were determined in terms of the Donbass by Stalin, who took part of Russia, redrew the map to include this eastern segment of Russia into Ukraine as a buffer zone. So this idea that Ukraine is a sovereign nation and the Donbass must fight for its freedom. 45% of the people in the Donbass are Russians. They consider themselves ethnic Russians. I'll bet if you had a referendum in those provinces, they would vote overwhelmingly to be governed by Moscow rather than by that little creep dictator in Kiev.
Well, in fact, that's exactly
going to get another $8 billion this week.
And in fact, that's exactly what happened in Crimea. They had a vote, and they voted to go over with Russia.
Obama wisely said, "It's none of our business.
Yeah.
We have no security interest in who runs the ports in Crimea, but Russia certainly has one. Without Crimea, it would have no warm water port. How can it let that situation arise? It would be like someone taking over the Gulf of Mexico, a foreign power taking over the Gulf of Mexico. So, this is none of our affair. What's going on between Ukraine and Russia is a territorial dispute, a border war that is none of our business, in which we have no strategic interest whatsoever. But these lunatics are determined by launching missiles deep into Russia to provoke the Third World War. They're even planning for it. NATO is doing exercises now to have mass evacuations of populations in Europe in the event of a Third World War. This is what they want, as insane as that is.
So why would you want? It's insane. My own view, I think we're closer to nuclear war, or as close as we were at the Cuban Missile Crisis. Why would they want this? If you're a leader of countries, why would you want to put your populations of your countries at risk of dying? That
because they will float above it. They'll go to their enclaves. They'll survive. And also, the upcoming presidential election has to figure in this. Maybe they think they could get some kind of a limited European theater war going that would not be the Third World War, that Putin would not unleash the nuclear holocaust. It would just be this huge ground war in Europe. And that would be enough for martial law in European countries, more control over populations, perhaps measures implemented in the United States that would interfere with an orderly election, I wonder, such as curfews and things of that nature. If there is a Third World War, if we start sending troops over there, there's going to be a draft, potentially. We don't know which way it's going to go. I still have hope, because they've hesitated during that meeting to authorize the use of basically ballistic missiles on Moscow. That hasn't been approved yet. Still have hope that they'll pull back from the abyss. We'll see.
Well, and I want to follow up. You called him a dictator, and that was not an exaggeration. Talking about interfering with elections, the guy has basically just said, forget the election. The comedian, again, it's not a joke, he is literally a comedian, playing president, said, you know what? forget the election, I'm just staying in power. Essentially doing what they accused Donald Trump of trying to do. This guy did, but he gets $8 billion. Well, more than eight. Currently $8 billion, hundreds of billions of dollars for doing it.
Oh,
But,
wow. By the way,
we're in favor of democracy, right?
that comedian literally played the president on television before he got elected. And that so-called paragon of democracy has not only canceled the presidential elections, he's shut down all of the opposition newspapers and TV stations. He's arrested his political opponents. He's outlawed the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. He's taken over church buildings, arrested priests and bishops. He's an absolute dictator. And yet these morons in the United States Congress, and isn't it odd, by the way, this is a Democrat-led war? The only dissenters from this madness are about 15 to 20% of the Republican Party. Yeah. The Democrats love this war. They're the party of warmongers now. Of course, it is a uniparty. The Republicans and Democrats have always united on the latest war.
But I thought the Democrats were the anti-war party. Remember Vietnam? I mean, all that. They were against war. What happened to them?
Well, the war serves their purposes now. So, again, it's about population control. And so they want the war for whatever impact it's going to have on American electoral politics. And also they want the European Union to become an ever more powerful centralized government, no longer a defensive alliance in NATO, by the way, which is ridiculous that NATO would be launching missiles into Russia. People have to understand that these missiles, if they use the long-range missiles, the Ukrainians can't code them. They don't know the codes.
Yeah.
So the codes would be input by NATO personnel. So NATO would be directly involved in bombarding Moscow with ballistic missiles.
Yeah.
This is what they want. They want to turn NATO into basically a standing army with an offensive capability. So much for the defensive alliance that NATO is supposed to be. Ukraine's not a member of NATO. They have no right to be defending NATO by getting involved in this war.
Well, Donald Trump says if he were in, these wars would end. Obviously, no one respects Biden and the Wicked Witch of the West that's his vice president. Shown by, Netanyahu basically said we're pushing forward when Biden was there sort of like a little puppy dog. Oh, please, but let's have some peace talks. Can we please? I have a peace plan. And he basically said, just send me the check. I'm invading anyway. I mean, to what extent have they just lowered the prestige of this country to, that of an irrelevant banana republic?
Well, if we don't have World War III, the only outcome of this war is going to be Ukraine will cede territory, will declare neutrality, and that will be the end of it. There will be a peace treaty. There's no possible way Russia's giving back anything it's recaptured in the Donbass, which, as I noted earlier, was originally part of Russia anyway, for the most part. He's not giving that territory back. He's not giving Crimea back. So this war will not go on endlessly. Russia's superiority will eventually be determinative of the outcome. It's already seeming that the Ukraine is on the brink of defeat. So barring NATO's entry into this conflict and World War III, Ukraine can't win. It'll win it. If it wins anything, it'll win something at the negotiating table. That's how this is going to end. They're not going to get back all that territory. It just isn't going to happen. Barring the end of the world and a nuclear holocaust. Then they can have the blast crater that's left.
So, picking up from the gospel I read to you, just stepping back, do you think that means we're in the end times? Many people are asking, do you think these are signs of the end times?
No, we can't be, because the biblical prophecy would require the appearance of the Antichrist, who would be known throughout the world as a miracle worker, who would deceive, if it were possible, even the elect. Enoch and Elias would return to do combat with the Antichrist. We haven't seen any of that yet. We're in the antechamber of the end times, I would think. But then, since the message of Fatima remains unfulfilled, it seems to me that there would be a period of peace after this threatened conflagration. Maybe there will be a third world war. Maybe the vision of the third secret of Fatima, in which a pope escapes a devastated city, barely escaping alive, traversing the distance filled with bodies. Then he gets to the top of the hill and he's assassinated. Maybe that has to happen first. The third secret has to be brought to completion, all of those horrible events have to occur. And then, finally, maybe in the midst of this, the successor of the assassinated Pope will consecrate Russia. Then there will be a period of peace. And after that, the end times. But it's certainly not the end times now.
Well, and all that is certainly within our control. We can, in the sense that Our Lady gave us the peace plan, what we need to do, and we're near the end of September here, first Saturday, make the 5 first Saturdays the community of reparation. If you don't know how to do that, the Fatima Center website has a whole explanation, a little pamphlet you can download on how to make the community of reparation of the 5 first Saturdays. What did Our Lady say? Pray the rosary every day. We can do that. Make sacrifices for sinners, particularly those who have no one to sacrifice for them. So, we're not Donald Trump. We're not running for president. We can't change these world events on the high stage that they happen on. We can't elect the next pope, but we can do these things. And Our Lady gave us our word that the triumph in the end. I always find that interesting that she says, "In the end," almost as if she knew we'd be thinking, like, how much longer can this go on? Is this ever going to happen?
Yeah, that's a key phrase, in the end.
In the end.
Meaning all kinds of awful things will happen.
Yes.
But in the end, my Immaculate Heart will triumph.
Yes. So we can just go with that certain hope. So.
And then, of course, all of us are facing the end of the world anyway. That's commonplace, but it's true. So we shouldn't focus too much, especially older people like myself, because the particular judgment awaits every single one of us.
It's funny. People used to say that to my grandfather. "You're afraid? What if the world comes to an end?" He says, "I'd be dead anyway. What does it matter?" So, anyway, well, there you have our view of church and state this week. Unless World War III puts an end to all of it, we'll be back in 2 weeks to see.
Not any better than last time, I guess, huh?
Exactly.
Maybe there'll be some improvement next week or 2 weeks from now.
We'll see you then.
Take care.